choose from. So we actually have separate discovery services, one for our articles and ebooks and things like that, and then one for our catalog or more print materials that also does include some electronic resources. For articles, we subscribe to ProQuest's Summon platform, and we call that Articles+ locally. And then for our books and print catalog, we use a discovery layer from Oracle called Endeca. It was originally developed for e-commerce sites, but our consortium, the Triangle Research Libraries Network, sort of collaborated and came together to set it up for our public catalog at our various consortial libraries around 2007, I believe. So here, specifically at UNC, users can sort of select different access points based on whatever sort of particular need they have at the moment. So if they're looking for a quick resource, that main search bar in this image on this slide leads to Articles+ Catalog, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that is in a moment. They can also get into our e-research by discipline system, which is more for specific database access and so on. And on the next slide, it will show sort of 4 different access points, including the couple that I've just mentioned. Do you mind clicking again, Bob?
There we go.
Okay, yeah. So here on the top left, you see our library catalog, which in addition to those sort of print holdings that we have, also contains ebooks, databases, online videos, and other sorts of electronic resources. So it's got a lot of different stuff going on. The top right there is a search results page for our Articles+ or Summon service. This contains about 80 to 85% of our electronic holdings. There are some that are excluded that are electronic resources, as well as our print resources are excluded from there. The bottom left is the e-research by discipline page that I just mentioned. This is powered by LibGuides, and kind of in conjunction with that on the bottom right is our A to Z database list, which is also through LibGuides and accessible from the e-research by discipline page. And that page itself is just a list of our databases by subject or discipline, kind of loosely based on our academic departments or units here on campus. So the search, kind of main search from our homepage is called Articles+ Catalog. And on the next slide, you'll see what that looks like. So this is just a screenshot of a search for water conservation. On the main homepage, the search bar that you saw on that first slide leads to this page. It was developed in 2012 as sort of a custom combined search bar leading to the 2-column results interface that you see here. So on the left, the results are being pulled from Articles+, which again is powered by Summon. And then on the right is from our catalog, which is powered by Endeca for print and electronic books, databases, media, and more. So users, when they land on this page, they can either immediately jump into a record for an article within its sort of native interface, whatever database it's coming from, or into one of our book holdings or catalog holdings right away within Endeca, or they can kind of go into the full results for Articles+, or the full results from the catalog there by clicking View All Results at the top of the page. And so if you, do you mind clicking one more time, Bob? A little, yeah. So here again is that main search bar. So anything, any search term that gets typed into the bar where it says search for articles, books, and more leads to that combined 2-column page. And it's used very frequently, as I'm sure most of the sort of main library search bars are. We wanted to keep it simple, sort of similar to Google in some ways, with this sort of one search bar that then leads to a bit more complex system that we've done usability testing with and have found that users tend to catch on quickly and like to use it when they are beginning their research right away. So then the rationale, there's more sort of behind why we went this direction. And if you click onto the next slide, that gives a few more details that I can talk about. So originally back in 2012, we had implemented Summon, so it was sort of our phase 2 of exploring if we should add our book or catalog holdings from Endeca into Summon. And we ran into some issues. Summon needs MARC records to sort of ingest catalog information, but we found that we could not extract MARC data from Endeca. I'm not 100% sure of the details, but basically it was going to end up, it was doable, but it would take a whole lot of developer and sort of work on our e-resources and serials management side. And even if we put in all of the time and effort to bring our MARC records into Summon and have both print and electronic resources in that search, in that discovery system, it would end up still excluding some of our sources. So we have, for example, we do a shared records program with our consortium. And so our local ILS or Endeca doesn't actually contain some MARC records. For some of our collections, one of the collections being our Oxford University Press ebooks, which at the time was sort of a newer collection that has since grown, and those would have been completely left out of Summon or Articles+ had we brought in all of our MARC records. So there were definitely concerns about doing that. And so what the group did that was tasked with sort of exploring this was some usability testing in spring 2012. To see if there was a way to kind of get around this complication. And so they talked to 8 participants from undergraduate students all the way to cancer researchers here on campus, so that covered a really wide swath of people at UNC. And they found a majority of the participants preferred a combined, so having a Summon with both electronic articles and print books and other sorts of sources in between. But due to those issues I mentioned earlier, and just the amount of developer time it would take, they decided to go the route that we did, which was having a combined search that takes you to that 2-column interface. And I should add, with any sort of usability testing, what users say can sometimes be very different from what they do. So in that 2012 usability test, it was observed that users didn't quite notice the difference or understand the difference between a print book result versus an electronic article result, and others. So that was why they felt okay kind of letting these kind of internal costs of combining our catalog into Summon outweigh the benefits or what the users were saying they wanted. So in fall 2012, we released this combined search interface and did follow-up usability testing in spring 2013. And what we found is participants were actually pleased with the overview of the materials that they saw on that 2-column search results page. They did suggest a few minor interface tweaks that we've done since then. And it basically ended up being wider columns, more white space, lines to kind of distinguish the 2 columns a little bit more. And we haven't really had any complaints since. We have run a few, not completely focused on the combined search interface, but we have kind of included it in various usability studies, and when we look at search on our site, and it's still used heavily. I think from that main search bar on the homepage, we've had over 158,000 completed searches just in the last fall semester alone. So it is heavily used for research. And so most recently, we did some usability testing actually comparing Summon and EDS. And so if you'll click to the next slide, there's some details there. So we talked to 10 undergraduate students. 5 looked at our UNC Summon or Articles+ interface, and then 5 looked at Western Carolina University's EDS or EBSCO Discovery Service, their interface. And we did this, we had them perform the same tasks in order to be able to sort of cross-compare and see if there were any major preferences or differences between Summon and EDS. And the reason we chose Western Carolina University was because they reflected most similarly to our implementation of Summon without print resources in there. So just some examples. The tasks 1 through 3 were sort of basic, what you would expect normal sort of undergrad students to be doing for research in their class. So we would have them search for a general topic like dinosaurs with feathers to find an article that was peer-reviewed and published after 2014. And so for those first 3 tasks, they were asked to rank their satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 5, and I'll share those results in a moment that kind of show the differences that came out there. Tasks 4 and 5 then were optional, just sort of depending on how quickly the participants got through the first 3 tasks. And they focused more sort of on behaviors and sort of special features within. So one example of that is you've spent some time researching dinosaurs with feathers and have found a few useful articles. How would you save these articles for later if you couldn't leave this page? So they're sort of within those result page systems for Summon and EDS, and then kind of figuring out if they'd be able to save or not. And then the next few slides are just sort of as examples of what those interfaces look like. So Bob, you can kind of click through these faster. This is the Articles Plus search, and then a results page for that here at UNC. And then the next 2 show Western Carolina's search. This isn't their main search. The interface on the previous slide, we used a more stripped down, we found a more stripped down version, so it wasn't coming from their homepage, and it was a little closer to what we had here at UNC, so we tried not to skew it with it being from another school, basically. And then the next slide is those search results page, and it's pretty similar. It has the chat interface incorporated into it as well, which ours does not have. So for the satisfaction on those first 3 tasks, on the next slide there's a graph that shows sort of how it fell. So the participants ranked their satisfaction with the results on those first 3 tasks. And as you can see, they're pretty close across the board. The first one is probably the first task where they had to find a peer-reviewed article, was the most sort of difference, I think, that we saw. The average ended up coming out to 4.7 out of 5 for Summon, and then 4 out of 5 for EDS. So it's not a big difference between the 2, with the first and third tasks having a little bit more preference for Summon, while the second had slightly more preference for EDS, which was finding an ebook on that second task. So this next slide kind of goes more into the findings. So there was no difference in user success. They all successfully completed the different tasks that they were asked to. Most did actually make it through all 5. I think there were only 1 or 2 who only made it through the first 4, but for the most part we got a lot of feedback from them, and they found what they expected to find based on what they told us and what we observed. There was slightly greater satisfaction with Summon, as I mentioned, that 4.7 out of 5 versus 4 out of 5. It wasn't a huge difference, but there was. And we do wonder if it comes down a little bit to UNC versus WCU. But we did find some other sort of interesting pieces. Students didn't know about the ability to save articles, and they even they sort of mistrusted that feature on both interfaces. And then they also weren't sure what altmetrics were, but thought it sounded pretty cool once they knew what it was. I think those are sort of some interesting follow-ups or sort of instruction points that we could do in the future. And then overall, all of the students, whether they looked at Summon or EDS, they tend to desire things that can be found in both systems. So it sort of depends on, I think, how the system is implemented and presented to your users. So it may come down, at least for us, when we're sort of deciding, do we want to stick with Summon? Do we want to move to EBSCO Discovery Service? It's probably going to come down more to internal workflows than the public interface, since we didn't really see a great difference between the 2 when we talk to our users. And so now, if you click to the next slide, it's got some information about my co-presenter, Scott. And Can you click to the next slide, Bob?
There we go.
Okay. Yeah, so I was going to introduce Scott. He's an associate professor of librarianship and the information systems librarian at Millersville University of Pennsylvania. And he's responsible for most of the library's electronic services, configuring third-party content platforms, and making sure that what electronic content is available at his library is accessible for students and faculty. So I will let you take it away, Scott.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. Can everybody hear me? Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes. I'm Scott Anderson, been here at Millersville for many years, and I'm going to be talking today about how we have put accessible archives, lodged it in our discovery space. Millersville is an EBSCO Discovery Service customer and have been since about 2010. So we have many years with the product already. And I'm just going to cover basically our philosophical approach to how we've deployed our discovery service, and then we'll get into a few things on how we have fit accessible archives in that space. So we have sort of a general philosophical approach to our discovery service. In most things here in the library, I am, and many of our colleagues are always striving to reduce the complexity, the number of decision points that students need to make to be able to effectively use the library. So one of the things that we have tried to do is to remove as much as possible the mechanics of knowing how we get things done here at the library, because ultimately that is of little consequence to them and getting their work done. Much in the same way that when we identify, order, and expect to receive items from Amazon, we have no idea how that process happens inside the Amazon space or from where that stuff was shipped from. Basically, we've taken the same kind of approach for working with our discovery service, which is sort of a binary approach in practical sense. Most of our content that we're making available to our students is electronic. So in that sense, if it's available electronically, we want to put that item right in front of them. And if it's not, we have simply thrown up this requested service in the sense that it's not available electronic, tell us you want it, and then we will figure out how to get it. So we frequently will deliver items back to users in electronic form from our physical holdings. So they don't necessarily need to get to microfilm or microfiche or bound volumes in the journal or serial sense. And also, should they elect to, we'll go retrieve items from the shelves for them if they want to place those kinds of requests as well. So we have tried to remove the black box that is the library and not require our users to understand how that works. To that extent, we've also removed a lot of linking choice through our link resolver and how we do linking. We typically do not routinely provide options to our users to say, here's an article, you can get it from JSTOR, Project Muse, and this other database. Typically, we will enforce some ordering to that, and we'll simply say, based on our experience, we know this service to resolve better than these two other services or this other service. So we're just going to give you the one link that we know is going to work 99% of the time, and there, you're done. So we've taken those kinds of things out. If you're a link resolver person, that typically is the one click through. And then the last thing that really underscores our philosophical approach is our library catalog, unlike UNC, our catalog is basically a database of purchase record. So we do not have much in there in the way of licensed content. We do not have any PDA or DDA ebook type records in there. So when students are looking for monographs, be they physical or electronic, you know, the discovery space is the place you go to find all that kind of good stuff, because if you are looking at our catalog, it will be significantly underrepresented of what we would make available to you. And in the grand scheme of things, in that very small fine print, as a practical matter, again, the library catalog is a very small percentage of the content that we make available to our user community. And because it's basically a purchase record database, For a lot of disciplines on campus, a number of mine in particular, for which I'm liaison to, the catalog holdings are actually reasonably out of date based on the fact that there's no PDA in there, there's no databases in there, those kinds of things. So those are the three sort of general philosophical drivers for how we've come to approach discovery and how we put content into and make it available in our discovery space. We have nearly everything in our library search, which is what we've termed our EDS instance. Near as we have tell, just about everything that we have is now represented in our single search functionality. Deep historical newspaper indexing is the significant item that is missing. So if you're looking for, what was in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the LA Times, 75 years ago, that's not in there. But at this particular point, we think that's about it. That's about all that we're missing. So if Sarah was saying they think they've got 80–85% covered, I think we're probably north of 90, but not to 100 at this particular point. So all of our other major vendors are represented there: JSTOR, Sage, Wiley, III, IEEE, you name it. If we've got it, it's reasonably represented there. We also let new content flow directly into our discovery environment. There is a setting in the EDS space to allow new content to be added, and we have that set to automatically add. And then if we notice a significant amount of problems down the road, we will tune something out, remove it from our index. But typically, we don't limit or shape how our library search service works, because it's, in fact, an intellectual exercise in discovery, and we have very consciously chosen to say, this is not what we have, this is what is available to you. We will go get stuff that we don't necessarily have, and we can typically do that in fairly short order. So we're not doing any kind of limiting at the outset with our discovery space. All right, Bob, there we go. For our implementations, we prefer our content providers, such as Accessible Archives, to work directly with our discovery service, EBSCO in this case. We don't have the time to really broker and shape how metadata is getting made available between parties. We see no reason or no value add for that to pass through us on its way to our discovery service provider, in the sense of we have to catalog it to make it available to get it into our discovery index. We would just as soon have that happen as a routine matter, not only because it works best for us, but then everybody else benefits from the same thing. And practically speaking, any content provider has some degree of self-interest in making sure that that transfer of metadata is going along smoothly and things are indexed as they should be, so forth and so on. If we do run into occasionally content providers that do not make everything available to a discovery partner, and in Millersville's case, we will deploy what is referred to in the EDS land as a custom catalog whenever we can. Again, because that allows us to very readily inject it into our discovery space, and we are not running all those kinds of things through our own local catalog because we have a policy of not necessarily including licensed content in our catalog. So we would prefer the metadata go right into discovery, and we're not going to handle it locally here through our catalog in the traditional sense. Because again, the catalog here has sort of changed in meaning and implementation. So we're first and foremost about using that discovery layer to make resources available to our users. Linking is another thing that we've worked very hard at here, and we try to maximize the availability of our content, be it owned or licensed or open access kinds of materials, and also to avoid false requests into interlibrary loan or document delivery. There's a number of us that routinely review ILL activity to are we subscribing or do we have access to the kinds of things that people are requesting? And if we're talking about long tail items, then we would say, yes, we are doing the appropriate things. But also, this is one of the ways that we have found over the last several years piles of content that we have subscribed to from various vendors that we did not properly implement, and we're getting requests through our library loan for things that we sort of know that we should have access to, and they just didn't get deployed properly. And also, we are a Smart Links and Smart Links Plus user here in the EBSCO space. These are basically referred to as custom links if you're an EBSCO administrator. And basically what that does is avoid OpenURL whenever you can. OpenURL, for those of you that follow along, only resolves about 2/3 of the time, 80% on a really good day. So we use OpenURL as a last resort, and we rely upon Smart Links and what EBSCO refers to as Smart Link Plus to make content like accessible archives available to our users at the item level without having to go through or develop links to content on the fly. So the last time we looked, we are only using OpenURL linking about 11% of the time. So last year, I think we downloaded nearly 300,000 articles. So, you know, do the math. In percentage terms, that's a relatively small number of activity through OpenURL. Not insignificant, but considerably diminished from where it was 7, 8 years ago. So how do we get those smart links? For those of you that might be interested, basically, if you're using EBSCO as your subscription agent, those can be automatically deployed. And if you are not using EBSCO for your subscription agent, then you may deploy them yourself manually. In the case of accessible archives, because we license and or purchase accessible archives directly from AA, we don't go through a Waldo or what used to be like an Amigos or some sort of state consortium. We have to deploy those manually in our implementation, which doesn't take much. You just need to remember to do it. So as we license things, we'll go through a process, and I will roll those links out and make them available in our discovery space. And related to that, if you're not doing either one of those two things, you're probably using an OpenURL to get access to this content, with the pluses and minuses that go along with using OpenURL. So for accessible archives, getting those added as we would do in EDS, you just add the accessible archives content to your EDS instance, because accessible archives is handing off to EBSCO 100% of the content that it does have available. So you can basically add it all into your discovery index or portions thereof as is appropriate. And here's a screenshot in the EBSCO admin user interface where I'm on my EDS profile and I'm adding in some databases to our discovery layer, and sort of down there in the middle is accessible archives, which has a name and it's on. So it falls in between access engineering and access science. So that's the metadata that I have turned on in our EDS instance. So it is available to us. Once you've added in the discovery, the metadata that allows it to be searched, you then have to add in the linking to it, which is on the next slide where you were just at, Bob. You have to add the custom links in, and this is where you get a little bit more granular opportunity to say, yeah, we have all of the accessible archives metadata or content available to us, so go ahead and deploy the EDS accessible archives all link, which right here, because of some testing we're doing, is listed as self, but normally that would be EBSCO managed and would be turned on. So that's all you need to do there, basically. And then once you've got that turned on, you should see it become active as a custom link. And again, there it is listed at the top of the list. And if you notice, in this particular space, that if you are an accessible archives customer and also an EDS customer, if you have subscribed to everything, you would use accessible archives all. However, if you've subscribed to a portion or a resource from our accessible archives, it's really only articles, you would simply turn on the accessible archives article links. If you had, for whatever reason, accessible archives only the book packages, which would be like the county histories, you could simply turn those on and then provide links right to the content from there. So there's a little bit more granularity when it comes to deploying the custom links that go along with the metadata that you've injected into your discovery space. And this is where if you had an article package from Accessible Archives, you've got a name, you've got some basic settings that go along with it, and here's where you, if you get one more, Bob, get to start saying, show this link to full text. Clearly, hide the link at full text. No, I don't want to hide the link if we have full text. I want to put it out there, so you counterintuitively answer no. If the item is in the collection, go ahead and put a link to it. And because if you had African American newspapers, the complete set, you would just select the first link or the first resource listed there. If you had part 2 and 3 and 4, you would select parts 2, 3, and 4. And then those links would appear in your user results list, and you'd be all ready to go. You'd be providing links to content that you have and no links to content that you don't have, or you'd have the opportunity to drive those users to a requesting mechanism if you wanted to. So again, we're trying to make it, binary. It's available to you, click here. If not, go ahead and request it. So I think I've got a screenshot in here of what users will see. Basically from our library website, very typical, somebody does a search for Underground Railroad. That will spawn some results, about 70,000 of them. That's the upside of the top search results. And then I've limited to Accessible Archives here just to give us a corpus of resources. So I've limited it to just the databases searched. If you update that, and then you'll move along to a different set of search results that's considerably narrower. Yep, go ahead. And in this case, it's a book chapter is what I've narrowed this down to as an example. So instead of those 60,000 results, we're now dealing with 141 that are coming specifically from Accessible Archives. So basically, the first result we get from Accessible Archives for this topic is Chapter 3 of a book, which deals in some way, shape, or form with Custer, Nebraska. Examples 2, 3, and 4 on this results list, and you can see Accessible Archives is what I've limited to over there on the left. And I think the one that I am most interested in is actually item number 2, which is Chapter 17 of the History of Decatur County, Indiana. Being from Indiana, I find that of interesting. Most people, probably not. But if you follow Chapter 2, check record at Accessible Archives, we should wind up with Chapter 17. This is the record specifically for this item, and this is where it tells you it's a book chapter and it's got a subject and those kinds of things. And that check record at Accessible Archives, which appears both on the left and then sort of at the bottom, always in close proximity to the green squirrel, that's the smart link that EBSCO is going to try to use to send users right over to this item over at Accessible Archives. So if you click on that, you will wind up close, in this case, to the book chapter. So go ahead and click on our next slide. And in this particular case, the metadata and how it's being handled are slightly at odds. So I've been working with Chris at Accessible Archives and our Discovery Service engineer at EBSCO to get this to resolve a little bit better. But you'll notice we're looking at the appropriate book, but not necessarily at the appropriate book chapter, which looks to have 25 chapter type objects. One more, Bob. And to get to what I'm interested in is really result number 18 on that list, and there is Chapter 17 on the Underground Railroad. And then if you click on Chapter 17 of the Underground Railroad, you're going to wind up actually at the item that you have already discovered, which is about 10 pages of this book. Okay? So that's a little longer than we would like users to experience. So as a result of putting this presentation together, I've submitted a couple of enhancements on both sides of the equation here. And we're working to basically get the user right to the chapter, which is, again, what we prefer to do in the sense of reducing complexity and taking clicks out of the click stream. So Millersville's working with both EBSCO and Accessible Archives to shorten that clickstream and get users to the chapter level when they have identified a piece of metadata that is the actual chapter, not just the book. If you are an EDS customer, that enhancement will be made available to you if you've got this stuff deployed already as a routine matter. If you can't wait, call your EBSCO technical rep and ask for the Accessible Archives custom link widget, which is what we're currently using. And they will deploy it for you as an interim solution pending systematic rollout of chapter level metadata for Accessible Archive stuff. One more. So really what happens now at Millersville is this is the same search with limited down to 141, and go again. We're back down to chapter 17. We've seen this before, which is the second result. And now we're looking at chapter 17, and because we have rolled out its view record of accessible archives with the asterisk, the widget basically now puts the user right at that chapter level. So they found a record for a chapter, they click on the view it, the full text link basically, and they wind up now right at the chapter. So that's what's coming if you are an Accessible Archives customer and an EBSCO EDS customer. Book chapters, for those of you that are aware, are always sort of more complicated than articles, which is next. So basically, we've done the same kind of thing. I've just moved down in that 141 result list to 84 through 88, somewhat at random. If nothing else, it's further down the list and gets us into some different kinds of publications. And I think there's a series of 5 screenshots here that basically will say that's the first document, which was the Christian Recorder, and it lands you right at that document. And if you keep going, you'll get the idea that the articles typically are working as they should be, even though they're coming out of different kinds of collections from the Accessible Archive space. And what you're seeing here is there were some other kinds of historical interest in underground railroads in the late 19th century that didn't necessarily have anything to do with the U.S. Civil War, but actual, what we would call subways these days. So the articles have been linking properly and do work properly. So in our world, they found an article, they click on it, and boom, they're over at Accessible Archives working with the article that they found. And then obviously, if they want a print version or a PDF, they can go get those. And I don't know what's immediately following this.
Hold
One
on,
more.
Jeff.
We're on to Q&A perhaps. Yeah.
We're on to the...
So, yeah.
Go ahead, Scott.
No, I'm done. So if anybody's got any questions about anything or threw their hand in the air, now's the time for either myself or Sarah.
Everyone, I have unmuted everyone, but I think there's a few that are self-muted. If you have a question, please feel free to bring it up. If not, you can always send your questions to me at robert.lester@unlimitedpriorities.com, and I'll have a slide at the very end that will also have Iris Haney's email as well. And we can certainly get those to Scott and Sarah, and you have a captive audience or captive presenters. So if you've got any questions, please let us know. No questions? All right. Well, I thank everyone. I thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Scott, for presenting today. I will be sending out a follow-up email, which will have a link to the full presentation. So if you weren't able to ask a question, please feel free at that point. I'm sure if you have questions about the various discovery services mentioned, please talk to your individual representatives. I'm sure they will be able to answer questions. Please note that Accessible Archives does work with all of the discovery services, including those that were not discussed today. So thank you again. I appreciate it, and Scott and Sarah, this has been a tremendous help to me as far as understanding discovery services. I've always worked on the content side, and I just kind of always thought, well, somehow or another, that black box took care of everything. So thank you again. You all have a pleasant day, and I will stay tuned for our next webinar, which is in June, dealing with data mining. Kind of a quirky little title is called Data Mining, the New Gold Rush. So thank you very much. Have a great day now.